Smart people got it this time.
She really got it, and she wrote this like completely amazed email.
So the move to Iowa was very good in that it took the apes out of kind of a wonderful reality that had been brought into being for them with a giant forest. They could go anywhere in it. Worldwide fame. Happened very fast. Into kind of a reality where people carry guns. Not everybody likes apes. Most people are not really telling the truth. And there's human conflict everywhere you look. And with that, they became aware of their responsibility to help people understand about what humans and apes could do. So they tried their ways of trying to figure out how, when people came with cameras, they could be much more cooperative. They became very cooperative in any experimental thing you would try to set up. And Pam Benicia was getting to the point where she was trying to translate for me in a way that didn't work very well, but to translate Kanzi's vocalizations in a way that I could document that she was doing that. Because she wanted to help me in the experiment, because she understood that people needed that data. You know, so they were no longer objects of study for me. I couldn't continue with that frame of mind. And even like in my interview with Lindsay today, they would repeatedly say, well, this program is about animal talk, and we're talking about animals. And when they would refer to Kanzi, the animal, Pam Benicia, the animal, and I was just like, I didn't say anything, but I can't call them animals. I never call them animals. They are not animals in my sense of, but you can say, oh, we're animals, humans are animals. Well, okay, but that's not how the word is used. It's just not how it's used in the language. Animals are different, and nobody really argues about that, except we all make ourselves comfortable by saying, you know, there's this category, and we're animals in that category, but because we are not really them, we just kind of have some overlap with them. We have all different kinds of medicine, we have all different kinds of laws, we have all different kinds of buildings, and all the things that we have separate us from them. And I'm saying, well, that's true. They separate us from all those other animals, but they don't separate us from these which are not animals. They really don't. And it's culture that's making that difference. And if we really understood that it was culture that was making that difference, then that's the most liberating thing that humankind can ever understand. Because humankind can understand that it made culture, therefore it's making itself, therefore it can change itself. And right now we don't understand that. We think genes can change us. We think technology can change us. But we think we're the way we are, and our bodies are the way they are, and everything about us is the way it is, and it's unique, and it's different from all these others. And anything we do to change it has to be from the outside, not from the inside out, not from the social relationships, not from the culture, not from how you speak about and raise a child from the moment it's born. We don't understand the power we have to be whatever we decide we want to be. And I don't think we can understand that until we look at least one step beyond us, and until we understand that bonobos are not bonobos. There's this bonobo culture, and it's been in effect for this period of time, and it's this way now. And here's this chimpanzee culture, and it's different from this other chimpanzee culture, and they've both been in effect, and they're having this external manifestation, which is, its behavior's highly flexible and highly alterable. But we think of that as being within the individual. It gets fixed and set because of ways of interacting. So if I grow up in a certain culture, I have to become that way to interact with all the other beings. And all the other beings have to be that way to interact with each other because they've done it. And if that includes certain kinds of illnesses that you're expected to have, certain things that are supposed to happen when you age, certain milestones of life, certain health issues, certain rituals, certain traumas, certain whatever, then a certain number of the individuals just to go through that. And if it includes war, and if it includes hate, and if it includes discrimination, it just includes that because it was all there interacting. And most of the negative parts, like hate and discrimination and all of that, they're bound together in this intricate way because of that other group of humans out there that might get more than we have, that, you know, so you get all these people sticking around you because if we stick around together, we can stop these others who are sticking around together so they can stop us. And we don't understand when we write books like Is Human Nature, Is Human Aggression Innate? You know, it's like in our genes. You know, 99.9% of whatever we are, we're making anew each generation. And we can't just stop that all at once because we're all interrelated. Our culture's all interrelated. Our whole world is all interrelated now. So we can't just put that on stop, but we can put that on modify. We can put that on, instead of human culture 1.1, we can put it on human culture 1.2. And we can change it all now conceptually in the correct direction if we start early enough and if we understand what we're doing, and if it's beneficial as a constructive whole to humankind as a whole. So the move from Iowa was difficult but fortunate, as most things are in life, in that it enabled the bonobos to see human culture in a way that they hadn't ever seen it before. And it enabled them to understand that I was facing things they never got. And it enabled them to coordinate and collaborate with me. It enabled them to understand, even when Laurent came, and Yoda knew that he needed to secretly sort of get a relationship with Laurent. Pico didn't know that, but Yoda knew that. And Laurent had the intelligence to be helpful, and Yoda could tell me that. That couldn't have happened. It was too insular. It was too wonderful in Georgia. It was real in Iowa. That I was dealing with something that required their help, and I wasn't just studying them. We were doing this thing together. And they got it. Over and over and over, they got it. And Liz understood it perfectly. Bill Fields understood it perfectly. And we all knew we had to kind of be something we weren't, because we were kind of in a pickle. And people responded to that in different ways. everybody felt threatened in different ways. And I'm sure Ted felt threatened. And the movement, the strong movement, like it, the kind of human culture that's kind of like a mudslide coming across because we've been this way, so we're going to be this way, and we're going to be a zoo, and we're going to do these kinds of things, and this is the direction we're headed. It just, it like flowed in on us almost like the flood. And you would see things like, you would see people come into the building that, Des Moines citizens who had lots of money. And we were hoping to get some of that money. And they wanted to see what bonobos were like. And they had heard these nasty sexual things about bonobos, but they didn't really want to see those. And you had reporters coming from around the world requesting to take a picture of Kanzi, but he needed briefs on because we couldn't see his penis. And you had anthropologists from around the world coming to see Kanzi, whom he would display his penis to, and they would say, "Oh, what is she doing?" And you're like, I can't explain that to you. You can't see anything, we didn't have that. We had enough control in Georgia that we didn't have those things happening. But it's although it was a nonprofit, Ted's a businessman. And anybody and everybody became a potential person to come in that needed to see, that could help bring money, And the bonobos began to get a real sense of that they hadn't really had. Sex was something that, it was for bonobos. There were certain things, we didn't do sex with bonobos, although Kanzi might slap his ball and ejaculate, but that wasn't really sex. That was just like, you had to calm down. It had nothing to do with sex. Even though there might be an it was like not sex. We didn't have sex with the bonobos. The bonobos had sex with each other, and whatever we did, they didn't know because we were humans and we wore clothes and so we were kind of like not sex, but we had love, really love. And the bonobos began to realize that there were all these sexual overtones to people and how they acted and how they did things. And the bonobos could pick those up almost instantaneously. They could pick up anything about humans instantaneously better than I could. It made me feel often dumb. And so they would see these visitors that were like particularly, I don't know, prudish or what, and they would come out and they would do something that like I never saw them do. They never did otherwise. It was like, we're going to do this sexual thing because you're there. And the visitors like, oh my God, they're bonobos. Oh, this is terrible. And I'm like, especially the younger ones, the adolescents. Kanzi and Pamanisha never did anything like that. But the adolescents, Alekia and Inyota, and I was like, guys, you have to stop this. This is like, don't do it. Like you talk to teenagers. So, all kinds of strange things like that begin to happen because of the tensions between the two groups. And because they were always overhearing people talking that didn't understand that they could hear them, that they could, people, even though we showed them all the data, we said they're really understanding what you're saying. They really, really are. So don't talk this way around them. And if we ever wanted to talk about the bonobos, Liz or Bill or I, we always went out to eat in another part of town, and we would never talk about them in their presence. So, and that's a very, rude thing to do in human society. And it wasn't that we taught them that was rude. They viewed it as rude. I don't know if Matata taught them it was rude, or it's just so rude you just feel that way if you're treated that way, like you don't understand, and somebody, So they would talk about us, and the people didn't understand it. A lot of the people that worked in the lab, and certainly the people on Rob and Ben's crew, didn't understand it. And I think that that was the beginning of the feeling that Sue has taken this too far. It's too, we can't emulate it in our lab, and Ben Beck was a major person in primatological societies, and I think that was the sort of the beginning of the division that led to a much more zoo-like approach there. Politically, it was very difficult. Scientifically, it was difficult because we didn't get refunded from the NICHD grant. And NICHD had said, we don't really believe that Ted is really trying to create a research facility. It's more like he's trying to create a zoological facility or something else. We don't know what he's trying to do. And we think you need to be there and show that you can get the research program really up and running again before we can feel confident in funding it. And we would like you to submit a smaller proposal than the one I originally submitted. So I submitted a smaller proposal, but the PR department wanted me to put the people that worked with the orangs, Carol Swartz and Rob and Ben and a few other people, in the grant. So I included them in the grant, and NICHD would not support any of them. And so NICHD said, look, just take it down to yourself and Patricia Greenfield and Bill Hopkins. Put in just those 3 proposals, and you will get funded. And the director at that point said, look, if that's all they're going to give you money for, is these 3 projects and not this big grant that you put in. And Patricia Greenfield and Bill Hopkins aren't Iowans. They're not even in Iowa. We Iowans don't care, and we don't need that money. So after an NICHD grant that began in 1970 and had run all the way up until 2004, I guess, it was just cut off, because when the government says to you, this is what we'd like to see you do, and this is what we'll fund you to do, and you say, oh, no, thank you. It's like, okay, we funded you for all these years, and now you're disagreeing with us? Don't come to us again. So that terminated the research funding from the federal government, and there wasn't anything I could do about it. It was so political that everybody needed to be equal, and the Iowans needed to be represented, and that had nothing, I mean, I didn't care if the Iowans were represented, I didn't care if it was equal, but I knew NICHD cared. And then the Smithsonian came, and they wanted to do, a presentation in the Smithsonian, which I guess is still up, I don't know. And they didn't want to include the orangs and Rob and Ben. Well, that was just terrible. They weren't including the Iowans, and they weren't treating the project separately, as though I could do anything about that. There was this lack of understanding, even on Ted's part, that if the science isn't equivalent, you can't keep representing it as equivalent to the rest of the world and have any credibility. And Rob and Ben didn't care about that credibility. They were from the zoo community, and they just wanted my reputation not to supersede theirs. And I didn't want to go around saying, oh, my reputation has to supersede yours. I mean, that's silly. So we were trying to find a way, I think, to make this work with all of these differences among us. But it was the publication of the JAWS article that I think that made people feel that if Sue's going to say this in that kind of a journal, and she's going to put the bonobos on as co-author, who knows what she might do next. And we can't survive if she does. So we've got to, Bill used to always refer to it as putting the collar on Sue. Those problems hit about the same time that the flood hit, and the financial base for Ted's funding collapsed. And Ted said that he was going to stop the funding, and we had come because of that funding. And suddenly we were going to be without any money. And Ted had promised $1 million for the transition point. And there were all these different people who felt they should take charge. If Ted wasn't going to be in charge, there were many different people who wanted to be the one to take the project further and to be in charge. And so there was a lot of claims about things. And Ted really turned it back to me and said, Sue, you should take charge. But the $1 million that was supposed to come to give me a transition time didn't materialize because Ted had intended that Bill and I both be part of that taking charge. And other people that I had no input to fired Bill. And so Ted pulled back $1 million. I think Ted was dismayed that other people in Des Moines had not stepped up to the plate and funded it. And it became talked about as, you know, Ted's project. And other people in Des Moines felt they didn't need to step up to the plate, that Ted had plenty of money and it was his pet project. And they really didn't understand about apes anyway, and the bonobos had all this sexual behavior. And there was some question about, now and then there would be a question, what is language, and do they really have language, you know? And I remember one time Ted had a lot of people come, very important people in the business community and in the political community, and the governor was there, and Rob showed them all around the orang building, and I don't know, they saw the orangs hanging on the wire, and they saw them, you know, hit a few things when Rob held up a box or a cup. And then they came over to, and the bonobos are running around here and screaming there and talking on the keyboard and doing this and doing that. And they started asking me questions, and I was trying to give a presentation and explain what I was doing. And then there was this big long silence, and all of a sudden Yoda goes over to the keyboard and he looks at me and he looks at them and he says, money, money, money. And I'm like, oh God, I didn't even know he knew that lexigram. I said, well, and Yoda's hoping you'll help us give some money, aren't you, Yoda? And Yoda says, money, money. You know? And then the governor says, are they really doing the same thing with the orangs that you're doing with the bonobos? And I was like, no. And Rob was like, yes. It was surreal, you know? I mean, how do you cope with your son telling the people they need money when he's just done this sexual thing with a leaky and he's a little bit young and he doesn't quite get everything that's going on, but he thinks he does? And you can't really explain this. You can't even explain in the JAWS article that the bonobos are having input to how you're doing things. And you could go back and be the exact kind of scientist you're supposed to be if you don't care about telling the truth. So things were non-harmonious. And the bonobos like things to be harmonious. They really try. to make things be harmonious. And when Ted felt that he had to pull out his funding and he had to not continue the $1 million that he had promised, then suddenly I had this building and all these bonobos and no money. And so I started a fundraising campaign, and the USDA came to visit within a few months and said, by the way, they came to visit when I had these people there that were interested in funding. They came right when the visitors were there. And they said, you can't bring these visitors to this building. And I said, why? And they said, because you don't have a visitor's license. Well, we'd always had a visitor's license. Even in LRC, you have to have that, like to bring Laurent, I would have to have that. And they said, you have to reapply. Why? Because the secretary, who was her job to do that, had decided not to do it if Ted wasn't going to fund it anymore. So she didn't put in a $10 fee, and we didn't have it. And I didn't even know we didn't have it. So the USDA comes, and I have to ask all these visitors to leave, and they explain that I can't bring anybody in for fundraising until I get another visitor's license, and it usually takes 3 years. And they brought the top level person in, and they looked around and they said, you have this spot on the wall of rust. And I said, but that's part of the cement nails that always rust, that's always been in this building, you know? And they said, no, you have to paint over it, you know? And it was just a little thing like that, that this was a $15 million building. It was new. And Ted had kept it up, aside from the flood, in which we put another $2 million in it. The building was in good shape, and it had never had these kind of critiques. So they came around and they critiqued this and this and this and this and gave me this huge list of things that had to be done before I could bring visitors in and solicit funding. So I had to decrease the size of the staff tremendously. I found other homes for the orangs because I couldn't work with them at the same time. It was impossible. I liked them, but I couldn't do it. And I had to put my retirement funds on the line to keep the building open so it wouldn't be closed down. And I had to put forth the money to make all these repairs. And I had to do lots of administrative things as well as the other things. And at that time, Tico, who had been born about a year earlier, I was also taking care of him with Alekia, Matata, and Panbanisha helping me, and Kanzi helping me, and Yoda helping me. They all helped me. But Tico had been born without the clinging reflex in his feet. So he only hung on by his hands. And up until the time he was about 2 months old, that wasn't too bad because Alekia could support him with her thighs. So when she would climb up in those high towers, he would be supported. But when he got heavier, it didn't work. And so she was walking around with him just hanging on with his hands. And she was quite aware that it didn't work. And so she was leaving Tico with Matata, with me, with Liz, with everybody else that would hold Tico for a while she just moved because she didn't really quite know how to move with him not doing that. And the more she began to leave him with all these other people and bonobos, the harder it became for him to nurse. And then he would always try to nurse from Panbanisha, who wasn't producing any milk, because he had the security of nursing from Panbanisha while Alekia was off doing other things. And so eventually, Alekia decided that she needed to capture Liz. And Liz was going to help her take care of Tico. Although Alekia hadn't been raised in the way Panbanisha was, with the combination of human and Matata helping. But she had seen that, she understood that. But Matata pretty much raised Alekia, and the Orang Mari helped Matata. So Alekia decided she needed more help, and Liz had opened a food box to hand some food in to Alekia, and because Liz got along with Alekia really well and everything, she didn't just use one side and put the food in. She just left the box open and handed Alekia some food. And Alekia, whom we didn't even know was small enough to climb out of the box, you would look at her, you would think she could not get out of this box. She couldn't, she might grab a person or something, but you weren't going to grab Liz. And she couldn't possibly get out of this thing. So Liz thought it was fine. And then all of a sudden Alekia is out there on the other side with Liz. And she's like, I can't go back in, but Tico's there. Look, Tico's crying. We have to go get Tico. So Liz went in to get Tico, and then Alekia got on her shoulders and wanted to, and Alekia's like, I don't know, 80 pounds then, and she's insisting on riding on Liz's shoulders and telling Liz where to go and telling Liz how to feed Tico and telling Liz everything, what she thinks what Alekia thinks Liz should do with Tico. So she's with Tico, she's with Liz, she's got somebody that she feels can help feed Tico, and she can stay with Tico, and Liz can hold Tico. And Liz is somebody who would do that. And she's very patient, and she's very kind, and she would help Alekia. And Alekia sized up Liz's psyche really well. But Liz couldn't do it 24 hours a day. And so Liz kept saying, Sue, you have to come help me. I can't get away from Alekia. She wants me to take care of Tico, and I can't get away from Alekia. And Liz didn't want to just push her away. So I had to go in and encourage Alekia to take Tico and let Liz go out and stay in there. And Alekia finally did, and kind of stayed till bedtime, and then everybody went to sleep, and then Sue went out. So then the next day, Alekia gave Tico to Pan Benicia and said, I really need your help. And I was aware that Tico was getting a little weak because Alekia wasn't with him enough to kind of nurse all the time, and he kept trying to nurse from Pan Benicia. So this was like the second or third day, and he was nursing from Pan Benicia, and Pan Benicia brought him out. And Pan Benicia brought him to me. And Pan Benicia said, we need help. You need to help me feed this baby. So I did. And then once I started feeding him, then I had to help him the way everybody else had to help him, but I had the food. And so I ended up staying 24/7 with Alekia or Matata or whichever bonobo was helping me, or sometimes more than one, and feeding Tico. And I could carry him much more easily than any of them because they weren't really bipedal and because he couldn't cling. So I had not intended to do that with Tico, but I felt, although it was very, very difficult to be there 24/7 for the 3 years that I was with Tico, 24/7, and all the other bonobos. I mean, you have to figure out how to take a bath, you have to figure out how to get your food, you have to figure out all these things because you've got to be there. You can't be anyplace else. And it doesn't matter if you get sick or you hurt your ankle or whatever, you have to be there. And while you have to be there, you have to get your building repaired, and you have to raise funds, and you have to deal with all these political things. And meantime, you have to be helping Tico. Tico is a third-generation bonobo, and he's a third-generation bonobo in my world because I have created this pan-homoculture. And I didn't think by the third generation we would get this thing where his feet act like human feet. He's had this neurological change. And I don't know if it's just something, an anomaly, or if it's something that happens really quickly if you don't have on the constraint that the baby has to cling or it dies. Because a lot of evolution is just lifting constraints. Like there's a constraint on how easy it is to vocalize between ourselves and apes, because if we form large groups and we vocalize, we can protect that group. So that constraint about don't vocalize is lifted. And it's lifted more in the bonobos than it is in the chimpanzees. So you can kind of see this. So it seemed like that's what happened. And because I had carried Pan Benicia and I had carried other apes, and they felt like that was my part of my role and my responsibility, and my responsibility to help see that babies got cared for and had milk. And so I didn't see any way to say no to that. And because there was a period of time where Tico, I would say maybe it was about 2 weeks, this transition time where he really couldn't cling. And Aliki kept leaving him with all these different people. And Matata was always like, leave him with me, I'll take care of him. Sometimes Aliki would leave him with Matata, but she couldn't nurse either. And she didn't really quite know how to walk bipedally and carry Tico. Pamanisha would try really hard to walk bipedally and carry Tico to support his weight. She was the only bonobo that would really try, when it was difficult and he weighed more, to support his weight and still transport him. But she knew that it was difficult for her, and she knew that I should be doing it. But there was about this 2-week period of time where you just didn't know if Tico was going to make it or not, if he didn't have more help. And during that time, it seemed to me that he began to develop more autistic-like traits from this kind of constant shifting that was being done. And I was feeling uncomfortable with this constant shifting, although bonobos let other bonobos take care of their babies, and the other bonobos were wanting to take care of Tico. But when the nursing was interfered with, it seemed like he moved toward an autistic tendency, because he didn't have security in his world that he needed. His world was not secure. So when I took him, I immediately made sure his world was secure. But as he kind of had a wild look in his eye. Liz has some pictures, you can see it very clearly. Not like any of the other bonobos we had seen. And that went away after about 4 to 5 months. And he didn't know how to really cling the way other bonobos did. And so that, sometimes not knowing that, he would start to do this thing like human babies do, and it seemed like his movements were not fluid and normal. So I would, when he would behave in that way, I would always sit with him really close, and I would take him to the wire, and he would pull himself up, and then he would stand bipedally. And when he got in that bipedal position and he would stand, those movements would just vanish, and his eyes would change. So we spent lots of time in that position, and I showed him things and kept him entertained when he was in that position. And he slowly he began to change. He seemed to be developing human-like capacities more rapidly than Yoda had. And my bond with him was very, very strong. So I can't talk about it right now.